I went back to San Francisco. They had the first CalCon conference, and that's where I met Dr. Rao. And I was, we were sitting in the front row. Not myself and Dr. Chong, who's my partner, over at the Tabor Hill Clinic, just a couple blocks away. We were sitting there with our mouths open and just thought, wow, this is, this guy is my new guru. And so I'm so happy to bring him here and introduce you to him. And without further ado, go Kevin.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Morris. He's a great storyteller, isn't he?
He's better.
Everything in the universe is unique. Every grain of sand, every leaf, every rock, every one of you is unique. And this is why we tell stories, to make sense of what we are seeing in reality. And stories are how human beings change as well. So I'm going to tell you a lot of stories, but our stories have to be consistent for them to make sense. So I'm going to show you why certain stories that we are telling now are inconsistent and how we should retell these stories so that they are consistent. So I'm going to begin by talking about climate healers. So this is an organization that I started in 2007, and Climate Healers was basically a rebellion against the mainstream framing of climate change. Okay? Because the mainstream framing of climate change is that climate change is happening because of fossil fuels, and it's like the fever that the earth has, but we only have to address that fever. That's the main thing that we have to address. There's no other problem. Okay? So it's like, imagine that you have a lump the size of a coconut by the side of your head and a mild fever. And you go to a doctor and you say, can you please check this out and help me? The doctor examines you and says, that lump is causing your fever, and it's cancerous. And the best I can do is to limit your fever to 2 degrees Celsius. Would you then say, please try to limit it to 1.5 degrees Celsius? Or would you ask him about the lump? Now, when you ask him about the lump, suppose he says, oh, I'll make sure it grows. It will double in size as quickly as possible. You look like you'll have 3 heads very soon. Wouldn't you run away from such a doctor? But that's exactly what our world leaders have been telling us for the last 40 years, and we've been sitting here and taking it as if this is normal. Okay? So Climate Healers was a rebellion against that framing. We need to heal the climate, which is heal the whole system, the whole of the earth. Okay? And we wanted to see, okay, how can we do this? And I'm going to talk to you now about the vegan metamorphosis. So metamorphosis is a nonlinear phase transition. I don't know how many of you have studied systems. Wonderful. And systems, when I was finishing my bachelor's in India, I had the privilege of working with a professor on nonlinear systems, my Professor Radhakrishna Rao. And I was able to observe in electronic circuits how soon it transitions from one state to another when you just increase the amplitude a little bit. It just moves. And when you reduce the amplitude, it has to come back to the previous state, but it takes a while for it to come back. So there is hysteresis in a nonlinear system. And the reason we look at nonlinear phase transitions is because all the changes that have happened in human history have been through nonlinear phase transitions. Nothing just stays forever the way it is. And yet, we tend to think in our stories that whatever we are doing now will continue happening forever. And then we extrapolate out and we get really worried about where we are going. Okay? And there is a nonlinear phase transition happening right now. And that's the vegan metamorphosis. Now, the vegan metamorphosis, how many of you are vegan? Can I ask you that? Okay. How many of you would deliberately hurt an innocent animal unnecessarily. So by definition, all of you are vegan. But for a lot of you, who you are and what you do are not in alignment, which means that you're suffering. You may not be aware of it, but you will find out when you come into alignment that you were suffering all along. And yoga is about union. It's about overcoming all such misalignments. Yoga is the root word for yoke in English. And yoga is basically overcoming divisions across all different lines of separation. The separation could be across gender lines, it could be across racial lines, it could be across religious lines, or it could be across species lines. And when we have that separation, we feel like there is us and them. We have an us and them framing across lines of separation. We have a disconnect. And that disconnect causes a lot of problems in our lives. Okay? So yoga is about union across all those. Though in the West, yoga has come to be known as just asanas, which is the third step of an 8-step process that Patanjali wrote in the Yoga Sutra. So I want to tell you my story. By the way, I love this song. Can you hear this? This is what I sing to my granddaughter. So anyway, I want to tell you my story, and I'm going to start with who I am and what I did and how I got to doing what I'm doing now. I'm a systems scientist. I was trained by Professor Thomas Kailath at Stanford, and he is probably a genius at this. He's one of the best system scientists in the world. And I was so fortunate that he was my professor. And when I finished my PhD, I went to him and I said, I feel like I know everything about nothing. I feel like I took one problem and beat it to death. Is this what a PhD is about? And he said, no, that's not why I gave you a PhD. I said, I gave you a PhD because I think you have the ability to take any problem in any field and make a credible contribution to it. So he gave me that confidence that I could take any problem in any field and address it from a systems perspective. So in the 90s, I worked on the internet, which was a very small thing at that time. In fact, there was an article in Newsweek in 1995 saying the internet is going nowhere. Who is going to buy books on the internet? Who is going to read articles on the internet? This is just a crazy pipe dream. And in 10 years, I overheard someone say, I don't think I can live without the internet. By 2005, it had become so normal for us. And that was a nonlinear phase transition that we were not even aware of. That it happened. And in 2005, I was having dinner with a colleague, and he told me, do you know what's happening in California? There are men getting married to men. Isn't that crazy? This should never happen. I'm glad that the California Supreme Court stopped it. And I told him, I have a colleague who's gay. And I would like him to have the same privileges that I do. So within 10 years, gay marriage was legal throughout the United States. So that's, again, a nonlinear phase transition in social mores that happened that we were not even aware of, how fast it happened. And in 2005, I was presenting a paper at the largest gathering of climate scientists in the world in San Francisco in 2015. And the paper was about veganism. And basically, we studied what would happen if the whole world goes vegan today. How much carbon can get sequestered on the land that's freed up from livestock production, and if you can return it back to the native forests that were there in 1800. We calculated that you can sequester more carbon than we have added to the atmosphere since 1750. And this is an undisputable number, because all they have to do is to go in their models, replace grasslands with native forests that used to be there in 1800, and just add it up. Okay. And we got 265 gigatons of carbon from that, which is more than the 240 gigatons of carbon that we have added to the atmosphere since 1750. So the climate scientists knew, when they came up to me and when they were talking to me about it, they said, "You're right, but this will never happen." And I told them at that point, I've heard this twice before, and every time within 10 years it became normal. So I do believe that by 2025 it is going to be normal for all of us to be vegan. So then in 2005, I watched Al Gore's presentation on TV, and he was giving a talk on the inconvenient truth at a small gathering in San Francisco, and someone had videotaped it like they're doing here, and they just showed it on Link TV. So I had come home from work, and I was very tired. It was in December in New Jersey, so it was very cold outside too. And I switched on Link TV, and I watched, and I was transfixed by what he was saying. I said, if half of what he's saying is true, I'm wasting my time working on 10 gigabit Ethernet, doing the same thing 10 times faster. So I told my wife this, and she said, if you think it is that important, go ahead and study it. So I started working on that, and within 3 months I went to her and I said, this is not only as bad as what he's saying, it's far worse, in my opinion. And so we decided to close our company and focus on this full time. So I wrote to Mr. Gore and I said, how can I help you? And I got trained by him in December of 2006 as one of the Climate Reality Project presenters. Then within a year, I became disillusioned with the whole process, because I was going around talking about it and not doing anything about it. So then in December of 2007, I started Climate Healers. And the idea there was to do something that would reduce carbon in the atmosphere, not just talk about it. So I had this great business plan. Okay? The idea was to go to people who don't have electricity and to give them solar lights and claim carbon credits for all the kerosene they are not burning, and use that carbon credit to pay for the lights. And we did this model, and we said, okay, if we can get at least $11 a metric ton for carbon credits, we have a viable business model here. So to start the process off, I bought 1,000 solar lights in Houston and had it shipped over to India. I went to Rajasthan. This is a remote village near the Thar Desert of Rajasthan called Karech. And after arriving at this village, within half an hour, my business model fell apart. Because the people said, what kerosene lamps? We don't use any lighting. Why do you want to change the night? God gave us night so we can go to sleep. So my business model fell apart, but I said, what are you using the kerosene for? Because they are getting 3 liters of kerosene a month. And they said, oh, we use our kerosene to start our cooking fires. So I said, so how much wood do you burn? And they said about 10 kgs per household per day. And I quickly did my calculation. 3 liters a month is like 3 kgs a month. 10 kgs a day, my God, that's 300 kgs a month. So I said the same business model would apply if I gave you solar cookers. So I asked them, if I gave you solar cookers, would you use them? They said, oh, show us how to make our food, our rotis, and sure, we'll use them. So in the meantime, we had 1,000 lights sitting over there, solar lights. So in August of 2008, the NGO, this is the NGO who's talking over there. That's Foundation for Ecological Security. So they work in a lot of different states of India, and they basically work on ecological restoration. So I asked the NGO, could you please distribute the lights, two lights per household, because we have them here anyway. And This was done in August of 2008. And I went back in December of 2008, and I found out that those lights had become the most important possession of the household. The women were literally fawning over me when I went there. Whereas in August, they wouldn't even look at me. And I asked the NGO, what happened? Why are they like this? They are giving me a huge cucumber to take back with me to the US. So I asked them, what happened? And they said that August to December is snake bite season in the village. And the women used to get bitten by snakes. So every year, 20 to 30 women used to get bitten by snakes, and 2 to 3 women used to die from snake bites in that village alone. And do you know why they were getting bitten by snakes? Because they have to go out into the forest before the men wake up and do their business. And that's when the snakes are having their babies, and they are very aggressive too. So if you step on the snakes, they bite you. And in the dark, they couldn't see the snakes because it's winter time. And with the solar light, they could see the snakes. They didn't step on them. So that year, they had 0 snake bites in the village, and I became a hero. Completely, disconnected, side effect of what we are doing. Now, this village had done something very incredible. They had taken some 250 acres of their common land, and they protected it with a fence. You can see the stone fence here. And this photograph was taken in 2002, and this is taken in 2006. So within 4 years, the forest came back. All you had to do is to put a fence around it and prevent people from going inside and livestock from going inside. So they had given me these 2 photographs, and I used to go and give talks, as part of Al Gore's climate reality project. And I used to show these 2 pictures and say, see how fast we can bring back the forests. So if we just release land back to nature, we can sequester all the carbon that we have put out into the atmosphere. And people would ask me, are you sure they didn't take the first picture during summer and the second picture during winter? Maybe they're fooling you. So in December of 2008, when I went, I asked the women to take me to that protected land and show me what they have done. And they showed me this. So I took this picture, and I immediately on the spot went vegan. I swore to myself that I will never, ever eat any dairy products ever again. Because until that point, I was a vegetarian, a lacto-vegetarian. And I saw the impact of my consumption on what was happening in the forests. Because you see, in India, we drink a lot of milk, and we don't eat so much beef. With the result that the cows are living for 25 years, and they're eating up the forests. So I realized that I was causing more devastation than those women could possibly cause with their firewood. Probably 50 times as much, just by doing this, just by eating dairy products. So this is on the cover of my first book, Carbon Dharma, because it was a major change in my life that happened as a result of just asking them. Then next year, in 2009, I went to this sanctuary in Coorg, which is in the Western Ghats of India. And I was struck by the perfection of this forest, this sanctuary. Every insect, every plant was in its place. Everything belonged. Every animal did its thing, and the forest came back. So this sanctuary used to be a coffee plantation in 1992. And a couple from New Jersey went there, purchased this land, tore down the fences, and let it go, gave it back to the animals. And the elephant would go eat a jackfruit in the national forest nearby and come and poop all the seeds over here. And new jackfruit seeds will be born because the seeds are there with the fertilizer for the seeds as well. So everything the animals did helped the forest come back. The elephant would break a branch off a tree, eat the leaves and throw the branch away, and it creates an opening for sunlight to stream in and nourish the underbrush. The underbrush is so thick in this forest that you cannot walk there. Only snakes can go in there. You only walk where the elephants walked, because they break things up and they create a pathway for all the other animals. I felt a sense of perfection, and I asked the couple, Pamela and Anil, how did this happen? What else did you have to do besides letting the animals come and do their thing? They said, we had to patrol the land and make sure that no human being comes inside. And at that point, I felt so small, as if I don't belong anymore, because I was born in this forest, just 200 miles away from this place. But my ancestral place also used to look like this. So that was the low point of my life, so to speak, in 2009, when this happened. So this is the story of separation that we tell ourselves. You know, the original sin, when the serpent convinces Adam and Eve to eat the apple from the knowledge tree, and they're banished from Eden. Just take human beings out and you have Eden, but you put human beings there and there is no Eden left anymore. So this is the story of separation that we have been telling ourselves and that we have been enacting. Okay? And you see that it is so pervasive. And as we tell this story of separation, we actually tell stories that don't make sense anymore. They're not consistent anymore. For instance, we say that God or Allah or Brahman, whatever name you want to call God, is all powerful, all knowing, all seeing, all compassionate. And yet, in the Laudato Si, which is the Pope's encyclical on climate change, he is writing things as if human beings are more powerful than God. Because human beings have destroyed nature against God's will. So what was God doing when we were destroying nature? He was just saying, I'm so helpless. Is he all powerful, or are we more powerful than God? What is our story? And it's not just the Christian. If you look at the Islamic Declaration on Climate Change or the Hindu Declaration on Climate Change, you have the same inconsistency. And these inconsistencies happen because we have bought into the story of separation. Then later that next year, we finally got a solar cooker that works. A solar cooker that can cook their rotis. And the women were very excited when I went and demonstrated how you can make your food, right out there in the sun. You don't need anything else. You don't need wood, nothing. And we deployed this in the village in 2010, January. I went back in May of 2010, and not a single cooker was being used. It was an abject failure. So I asked them, what happened? These are people who adored me, right? So they would do anything for me. And they didn't want to use it. So I asked them, what happened? And they said, why did you do the stoves differently than the lights? The lights, we just leave them on top of our huts, we go away, do our work, we come back, and the lights are fully charged. And then we use them at night. But the cooker, you're asking us to cook during the day. We cook early in the morning and late in the evening. We cook inside the house, not outside. We cook sitting down, not standing up. Everything is ulta, is the opposite in the stove than what we are used to. So nobody wanted to use it. So at that point, I said, it's not in my hands. I'm just going to let it go and see what happens. Okay? But we hadn't deployed all of them. We only deployed 5 stoves in this village. So fortunately, it wasn't a big disaster. And then later that year, this girl was born. She's our granddaughter. She's half South Asian Indian. She's 1/4 African American, and she's 1/4 American Indian. So she has 3 continents in her. And when she was born, I was in California, and my wife immediately left and went to Phoenix because that's where she was born. And she came back a week later, and then within a couple of days she was back there again. I would hardly see my wife anymore at home, right? She was always over there. And then she told me, there is something about this girl, you need to go see her too, right away. So when she was about a couple of months old, I went to see her. And I held her in my arms, and I had the exact same feeling of perfection that I had in the sanctuary. So I knew at that point that she belongs exactly as she is in the ecosystems of the world. On this planet, she belongs exactly as she is, and we all must belong exactly as we are. And we are not telling the right story. So the story of separation must be wrong. So that's the conclusion I came to at that point. And I said, okay, now let me research it to see if I can make sense of this new way of looking at things. Can we tell a story where we do belong exactly as we are? We are doing things that nature wanted all along anyway. And as part of that, we have to change. And you know what? As part of my research, I went back to the Hindu scriptures. And I found that in the Hindu scriptures, there is a knowledge tree story. In the first chapter of the Rig Veda, which is the first of the Hindu books, there is a story about a knowledge tree as well. And this story was very different from the knowledge tree story in the Bible. There are similarities, of course. Instead of Adam and Eve, there are children who play the role of Adam and Eve. Instead of a serpent, there is a rich uncle who plays the role of the serpent. And instead of an apple tree, it is a fig tree. And it's an upside-down fig tree with its roots in the sky and fruits on the ground. It's the cosmic fig tree. So, the story begins with children playing with sticks and stones and rag dolls on the floor of their hut in the middle of the forest. And their uncle comes to visit them. The uncle says, why are you playing with these trifles when the cosmic fig tree is right outside your hut? Go out under the tree and wish for anything you want, and it will give it to you. Then you can be playing with real toys instead of these trifles. The children don't believe him. How can there be a tree where you stand under it and wish, and it will give you whatever you want? So they wait until he leaves. Then they rush to the tree and start wishing. They wish for sweets, and they get them. And they gorge on the sweets, and they get stomachache. They wish for toys, and they get them. And they play with the toys and they get bored. Fancier toys lead to greater boredom. So there was something about the tree that they didn't understand. It grants you what you wish for, and along with it, it grants you the exact opposite. You have to take both at the same time, because that's how the universe is built, of dualities only. The children didn't know that. All they knew is that they couldn't stop wishing under the tree, and the more they wished, the more miserable they were. So then they become young men and women, and they're still under the tree wishing. And this time they're wishing for what young men and women wish for. The 4 main fruits of the tree were sex, fame, money, and power. And with each comes with its opposite, and the result was more misery and suffering for the young men and women. Then they get to be old men and women. And they congregate under the tree in 3 different groups. The first group says, we were so happy when we didn't know about this tree. This tree ruined our lives. It's all been a hoax and a farce. And the Rig Veda says they were fools, for they had understood nothing about the tree. The second group says, we must have been wishing for all the wrong things. If we could go back and wish for different things, I'm sure we would have been a lot happier. And the Rig Veda says they were bigger fools, so they understood less than nothing about the tree. And the third group was the most foolish of the lot, for they come under the tree and they say, we are so miserable, we wish we were dead. And the tree grants them the wish, and they're immediately reborn underneath the same tree. The tree always grants wishes in dualities, not by itself, right? And the story doesn't end there. It talks about a lame child who has been watching all this from inside the window of the hut. He also wanted to go out and wish for a good leg so he could walk. But there was such a crowd of people thronging under the tree, and they were too strong for him, and they pushed him away. So he stood there and he watched, and he saw how the tree was making everybody miserable, and they were suffering. And he saw this brilliant cosmic swindle that the tree was performing on the people who were wishing. And not only on the people who were wishing, but also all the other animals and other beings that were suffering under the tree because of the wishing. And when he saw that, he began to feel a well of compassion come from within him for all that suffering. And he lost the desire to wish. He became detached from the tree, and he was the happiest of the lot. So the story ends there. Okay? Then we have the Upanishads, which are like commentaries on the Vedas, where wise men tell you, or wise people tell you, what they really meant in the Vedas. So in one of the Upanishads, the Shvetasvatara Upanishad, they say that the wishing child and the watching child are inside each one of us. That is the duality that we all have. In fact, the purpose of all meditation techniques is to discriminate the watching child from the wishing child. All of them. That's all they're trying to do, to discriminate your watching child from your wishing child. And it's up to you to elevate the watching child over the wishing child so that you become compassionate and detached from the knowledge tree or the wishing tree. So it makes it seem like to be happy, you have to just step back from the universe and watch. So this question comes up in the Bhagavad Gita, which is another sacred text of the Hindus. In the Bhagavad Gita, the chief protagonist goes to God and he says, why should I fight the battle? Or why should I wish under the tree? Why don't I just meditate upon you and I'll be very happy? And God said, no, you must wish under the tree. And he taught Arjuna how to wish under the tree. You see, the people who were wishing under the tree were unhappy because they were standing under the tree and wishing for themselves. If you go under the tree and you wish for the benefit of everyone else and become detached from the wishing for yourself, then everyone will be happy and you'll be perfectly happy wishing under the tree. Now, if you look at every line of separation that we have, whether it is across religious lines or across racial lines or gender lines, if we are the dominant side, we have access to the tree more than the weaker side. How are we wishing? Especially as a species. We are the only species that has access to the knowledge tree of the universe. How are we wishing? Are we wishing for the benefit of all other animals, all other beings, and become detached from the tree for ourselves? And that's where we have our issues right now. So this brought me to the analogy or the metaphor of the caterpillar and the butterfly. Because you see, you have to tell a story where we do belong exactly as we are. We've been making mistakes wishing under the tree because we are in the caterpillar stage. Because a caterpillar is a blind consumer. The moment he's born, he eats the shell of the egg he came out of, then he eats every leaf he sees, and next couple of weeks he gets fatter and fatter and fatter. But when the caterpillar is too big for his own skin, he stops and thinks about it. He builds a cocoon around himself, hangs under a twig, and meditates for a week. Wakes up as a butterfly. And as a butterfly, she's a very discriminating consumer. She only sips nectar from flowers. And as she sips nectar from flowers, she pollinates the flowers. She regenerates life, undoes the damage she did as a caterpillar. And the caterpillar and butterfly are a net asset to life. And the caterpillar stage is absolutely essential for the butterfly to be born. And I believe we are exactly in that phase of metamorphosis. So I finished my book in 2011, Carbon Dharma, and I had the opportunity to go to the 17th Conference of the Parties, the UN Climate Change Conference in Durban, South Africa. This also happened because of my granddaughter. Because when she was born, my wife went and donated money to a hospital in Phoenix, the children's hospital where she was born. And the hospital happened to have a lottery, a raffle for everyone who donated. And she won the prize, which is a trip for two to South Africa to a safari for 1 week, all expense paid. And the UN conference was happening in South Africa at that time. I said, okay, we are meant to go. Let's go. And there I met Archbishop Desmond Tutu, and we gave this interfaith declaration on climate change to Christiana Figueres, the head of UNFCCC, and the lady who's handing it over is Ela Gandhi, the granddaughter of Mahatma Gandhi. Now, in that declaration on climate change, we had an addendum that we added, and everybody signed it. There were 40 religious leaders who signed it. And that addendum said, while climate change is a symptom, the fever that the earth has contracted, the underlying disease is a disconnection from creation that plagues human societies throughout the earth. And we, the undersigned, pledge to heal this disconnection by promoting and exemplifying compassion for all creation in all our actions. And everybody signed it. They said, it is the foundation of our religion is compassion for all creation. The foundation of all religions is compassion for all creation. Now, we say that in theory, but we need to practice it. And that's where we have a disconnect at the moment. So then by 2012, I found that there were people coming from all over trying to help me with this project, solar cooker project that had failed. Especially a team from University of Iowa. They have been sending students and a professor over every year for the last 6 years, trying to help. So this professor is a professor of mechanical engineering, Uday Kumar over there on the right. And he has been coming almost every year. And he got all his students to come up with a stored energy solar cook stove, where the energy is collected during the day, and it goes into this box, and eventually the box is wheeled inside and they use it. Okay? That's the idea, so that they can cook late at night or early in the morning when they really need to cook. They can cook inside instead of outside. This was a prototype. But it turned out to be so complicated and so expensive. We were looking at least $2,000 to make something like this and make it work. And we are still working on it, trying to figure out how we can reduce the price and make it not as cumbersome as this. But over the years, in addition to Professor Uday Kumar, he put us in touch with social professors from social sciences, like anthropology professors, who came and said, you can do an intervention that's much, much simpler that would help just as well. So by 2015, we came up with this little box that you put inside their stove. See this black thing? All it is creating a grate inside their stove. So it has holes on top, so that air can come from below and make sure that the flame is always oxygenated properly. We weren't sure how much this was going to do, but in our tests, we saw that it was reducing wood use by 60%. So we had it officially tested at the Cook Stove Testing Center in Udaipur, and the official results were 63% reduction in wood and 89% reduction in smoke. And this has been a huge hit. Women love it because it didn't change anything. All they had to do was to put this thing inside their stove and cook as if they were cooking before, but the wood use reduced and the smoke is reduced by so much. So I think there is a similar story around what we have to do about climate change. We think we need to have these complex solutions. We are looking for the solar cook stove that works right now. But there is a small little device that we can put in place that will solve climate change that we are not yet aware of. And I believe and I contend that that is veganism. Okay? So let me just give you a brief primer on what climate change is, what has been happening. So these two curves, the blue curve is the carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere, and the white curve is the temperature. And this was estimated over the last 700,000 years by just drilling through the ice in the Antarctic and taking layer by layer and analyzing the air bubbles that were trapped in the ice at that time. So based on that, they know that the CO2 levels had never been over 300 parts per million in the past 700,000 years. And the temperature was going through interglacial periods and ice ages. And we've had several interglacial periods and ice ages over the last 700,000 years. And in our current interglacial period, we have increased the CO2 levels to about 400 parts per million now. And CO2 and temperature are completely correlated because CO2 is a greenhouse gas. So as a result of that, the temperature is also going up. So that, in a nutshell, is what's happening now, the problem with climate change. And it's always framed as a fossil fuel problem. In fact, if you look at how much CO2 is emitted every year from different sources, you see on the right that most of it is now due to fossil fuels. Land use change is in blue in the very bottom. So land use change is only contributing about 15% of CO2 emissions right now, and 85% is coming from fossil fuels. But you see, CO2 is a cumulative gas. It accumulates in the atmosphere year after year. So you really have to integrate this over time to see what the true effect of each one of these contributors are. And if you integrate them over time, you will see that land use change is not so insignificant anymore. In fact, land use change is almost as bad as coal, the number one fossil fuel contributor to CO2 emissions. Okay? And this is by just starting from 1850 onwards. But if you look at the curve before, you see here there's hardly any fossil fuels being used in 1850, but land use change was still significant. Because you see, we have been deforesting for 10,000 years, not just since 1850. And we have to really look at the integral from 10,000 years back to now. And if you look at that from 10,000 years to now, land use change is the number one contributor to greenhouse gas emissions and not fossil fuels. And a professor called Bill Ruddiman in the University of Virginia had that hypothesis way back in 2003. It's called the early Anthropocene hypothesis. And since 2003, this is how science works. Someone has a hypothesis, they keep testing it to see if it fails. And people have been testing it to see if it fails, and for the last 14 years, it has held true. So as far as I'm concerned, right now it is a theory and not a hypothesis anymore. What he found is that if you look at the ice core record for methane and for CO2, carbon dioxide, the methane and carbon dioxide emissions were going according to previous ice age records in the average over there in the middle. And then suddenly 6,000 years ago, they start shooting up. And his contention is that 6,000, 5,000 years ago, humans had deforested enough to create a contribution, a significant contribution to methane and CO2. Okay? So in that sense, the world as we know it really did start 6,000 years ago. Let's not argue about this anymore. So evolution is true as well. So according to his calculations, the temperature had gone above glaciation around 10,000 years ago, And it was going to go down and reach glaciation about 5,000 years ago. Except human beings, our ancestors came along and they deforested like crazy, and they grew rice, contributed methane to it, and inadvertently, they kept the temperature constant. So when people tell you that we've had this remarkable Holocene period where the temperature has been constant for the last 10,000 years, and here these other guys came along and did this fossil fuels and messed it all up. No, 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 no. It was constant because we were messing it up before. Our ancestors have been playing with the climate from the beginning. And so long as they were keeping it constant, we were very happy about it. Because otherwise, you would have a mile of ice on top of Chicago right now. Okay? And over the last 150 years, we have increased the temperature by about 1 degree Celsius. But we have a tendency to say, whatever we are doing now, we'll keep doing forever. And if we keep doing this forever, sure enough, if we keep burning forever the fossil fuels, temperature is going to increase to a point where we'll use up all fossil fuels and then we'll all die off. And according to that analysis, we'll come back to an ice age again. But is that how things happen? We know that we have nonlinear phase transitions in our lives all the time. So why don't we deliberately create one? And the biggest gift that we have been given, is land without forests. If you look at the global land stock, land carbon stock, the total amount of carbon on land is 3 times the total amount of carbon in the atmosphere. Land is a very powerful carbon sink. Okay? And if you look at where the land is filled with carbon, it's around the forests of the world. And where there are no forests, there's less land carbon. Oops. So it's completely correlated with the forests of the world. And if you look at where there are no forests, like from the western edge of Africa all the way into India, there are no forests. In fact, it's a desert. The Sahara Desert extends from the western edge of Africa all the way into India as the Thar Desert. It goes all the way into China as the Gobi Desert. And that's exactly where the ancient civilizations of the world were. Is that a coincidence? Or did we deforest and cause the deserts to happen? Okay? And it's completely correlated with our livestock density. If you look at our livestock and where they are around the world, you see where they are not. Oops. This is the Amazon, and this is the Congo. But they're surrounding the Amazon, they're surrounding the Congo. And every year they're eating into it more and more and more. Look at India. India has the largest density of cows on the planet. Because in India, we drink a lot of milk and we don't eat beef. So the cows are living for 25 years, like I said. And this is why I think that being a lacto-vegetarian is probably the worst thing you can do as far as the climate is concerned. So to understand the impact of this and what we need to be doing, I want to give you an analogy. Imagine that you're a weightlifter lifting 5 times your weight above your head. And you discover that you're on quicksand and you're sinking. What is the first thing you should do? Drop the weight. Now, suppose one of the bystanders looks at you and says, double the weight you're lifting. Wouldn't you say he's an idiot? Especially when you know that that person sold you the weights that you're lifting. What if another bystander says, you're too fat. You need to slim down. That's why you're sinking. That's an idiot too, right? I want to show you how it correlates with what is really happening in the world. If you look at the biomass distribution of megafauna from 10,000 years ago to 100,000 years ago, the biomass distribution of megafauna was fairly constant. So all the wild megafauna are animals that are greater than 25 kgs in weight, by the way, on average. So if you look at the total weight of all the animals that were, all the species put together that were 25 kgs or more, their total weight is about 200 million metric tons. That's shown on the left there, this wild fauna. And 10,000 years ago, we were a tiny little blip. By 1970, the weight of human beings alone was equal to the weight of all the wild fauna from 10,000 years ago. So one species had the same biomass as all the other species put together from 10,000 years ago. And their weight had decreased by about 60%. And on top of that, we were carrying double our weight in livestock. At that point, people panicked. If you recall, there was a book called The Population Bomb that came out in 1968, and Paul Ehrlich of Stanford said, we're all going to die. You're going to reduce your population right now. And in India, Mrs. Gandhi actually went around sterilizing people. China had the one-child policy. So we were all talking about population only. That's like looking at the weight of the human being, the weightlifter, and not the weight he's carrying. Telling the human being, the weightlifter, you're too fat. Then from 1970 to 2010, wild megafauna decreased by 52%. And our population doubled, approximately, and our livestock population went up by a factor of 2.5. But the story is actually a little bit worse than this, because you see, our livestock are all young animals. We kill them as soon as they grow up. So they're eating much more than their weight would indicate. So I'm only showing you weight. If you look at how much they are eating, our livestock are eating 5 times as much food as we do. So it's literally like a weightlifter lifting 5 times his weight above his head. And we are sinking. When this report came out in 2014, the World Wildlife Fund Living Planet report in 2014, and they said that 52% of wildlife had declined between 1970 and 2010, I did some simple calculations. I knew that human population had doubled between 1970 and 2010, and I knew that human per capita consumption had also doubled between 1970 and 2010. So if you draw an exponential curve that goes up by a factor of 4 in 40 years, and you extrapolate that out, how many years do we have left before we kill them all off? And I calculated it would be 16 years. That by 2026, they're all going to be gone at the current rate of destruction. And when I did this calculation, I was actually asked to introduce my advisor for an award. And I blurted out at that point, because my granddaughter was in the audience, and she was born in 2010. And I told the audience this result, that by 2026, all animals will be dead. All wild animals will be gone. And I said, I want to pledge to my granddaughter, right here and right now, that by 2026, there will be more wildlife than when she was born in 2010. That's a public pledge that I made, and I intend to keep it. And I need to recruit all of you to help me make this happen. So we are now already in 2016, 2017, right? If we extrapolate that out, by 2016, 70% of all wild animals will be dead from 2010 levels. It's roughly 3% per year we are going to lose. So in 2016, the Living Planet report of 2016 came out, and they said between 1970 and 2012, 58% of all wildlife had been destroyed. So it is going at 3% down per year. So this was a confirmation of my simple calculation. And now I am very serious about this. I really need to work on this. This is my focus. But as far as the UN is concerned, it's business as usual. The UN Food and Agriculture Organization is planning to double livestock production by 2030. If they do that, our necks are on the chopping block, if they succeed. But the UN has multiple organizations, and they all talk at cross purposes. So the UN Environmental Program had a report that said that by 2050, the whole world will be vegan, out of necessity. So I imagine if the UN Environmental Program and the UN FAO are both right, this is the way it would happen. You would try to double livestock production by 2030, and in the process kill everything off, and then we'll be desperately scrounging for food, and we'll be vegan. And our little dots are what's going to be left of both of us at that point. So I figured if we are anyway going to be vegan by 2050, why don't we do that now? What would happen if we do it now? And we have been talking to leaders, trying to get them to talk about this. So we had a demonstration outside Mr. Gore's training, because in his slideshow, he doesn't breathe a word about animal agriculture. So this is my granddaughter at the age of 2. And we were doing a demo outside his training, asking him that 51% of his leadership is missing, because 51% is the estimate of the contribution of livestock production to greenhouse gas emissions. And then we did a couple of movies. We supported the human experiment, which showed that actually our institutions, corporations are actually experimenting on us, because they have put 87,000 chemicals out into the environment without testing it. And now they are in the game of pointing fingers at each other, saying, oh, the cancer is caused by that, not by this, not by that, because there are so many of them out there. So it's very hard to pinpoint what the problem is. And Cowspiracy came out in 2014, and that's been one of our big hits, in the sense that I'm glad we supported it, and it has changed a lot of minds. And it shows how the environmental NGOs don't want to talk about it, don't want to talk about the impact of animal agriculture. So what we get from this is that we have a system that's fundamentally broken. The system of the caterpillar has reached its end. It cannot go any further. So when the caterpillar imagines that it will continue as a caterpillar forever, it's going to say, well, let me protect just the important part, maybe the head. The rest will blow up. I know that. But here is the story of the butterfly. If we go vegan right away, or over the next few years, next 10 years, let's say, then all the resources that we're using to feed our livestock right now gets freed up for us to bring back forests to sequester carbon. And as I told you, we'll sequester more carbon than we added to the atmosphere since 1750, just by bringing back the original forests that were there. And we have a chance to make sure that wild fauna are the same as they were in 2010, so that we can fulfill my pledge to my granddaughter. And then over time, our population will go down. As we remain butterflies, we know that in rich countries, we are having population decline over time. Population is being raised up just through immigration or other incentives. Like in France, they're offering women money to have babies. Yeah? So there are incentives to have babies now. So if we just let nature be, we'll be perfectly fine after that, once we make our transformation. And the beauty of it is metamorphosis is inexorable. It is inexorable. It's part of nature. And it's already happening. It's already happening. By 2010, 12% of millennials in the US were vegan. 4% of Gen Xers and 1% of baby boomers were vegan. And since 2010, the interest in the search term veganism on Google has tripled. And it has tripled in all the rich countries of the world. In the United States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Germany, Austria, United Kingdom. People are waking up. Now, I know there are a lot of flexitarians who are contributing to the rise of veganism too, because they are buying more vegan food and making it available to everyone. But this is a process. See, I asked you how many of you are vegan and how many of you would deliberately hurt an innocent animal unnecessarily. Because you would never hurt an innocent animal unnecessarily because we are compassionate at our core. We are all made in the image of God. And so going vegan is about coming home to who you are. And this is exactly what's happening. We are all coming home, and we are all taking different paths to come home. Some of us are doing it the flexitarian way, some of us are going vegan right away, But we are all in this journey, coming back to who we really are. So it's inexorable, it's going to happen. And the religions are now getting involved. The Hindu Declaration on Climate Change is the first major religion declaration that asked everybody to go vegan. And it was signed by 70 Hindu leaders. And now they're in the process of asking their people to go vegan. Change happens from the ground up, not from the top down. All social movements happen from the bottom up, not from the top down. And this is a very relevant movement that happened in India 100 years ago. It's called the Khadi movement. The person on the left and the person on the right are the same, and it's Mahatma Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi was a lawyer. In fact, he was not very well known in India until 1909. And he was 40 years old at that time. He was well known in South Africa, not in India. But in 1909, he happened to write a book called The Hind Swaraj, in which he compared Western civilization with Indian civilization to the detriment of Western civilization. So he said, we really have nothing to learn from the West. We know how to live. So with the British kindly leave India. That was the thesis in his book. And the British immediately banned the book in India. And when the British banned the book in India, it became an instant bestseller in India. Everybody translated it into every language of India, they read it, and Gandhi became very famous. So by the time he landed in India in 1915, January, he was a rock star in India. And this is a picture that was taken on the left. The picture was taken on the ship. So this was in 1914, and the ship took like 4 or 5 months to get to India. So by 1915 January, he landed in Mumbai. Then he traveled throughout India for a few years, 3 years, just to see what should we be doing about the British colonial rule and how to get them out of India. And then in 1919, he started what is known as the Khadi movement. The Khadi movement was a simple idea. He asked the people of India to change their clothes. Change your clothes from British clothes to Khadi clothes made by Indians in India. And at first, people laughed at him. There are several articles you can read now on the internet where people said, are you crazy? This is the mightiest empire the world has ever seen. The sun will never set on the British Empire, remember? And you're going to fight them by changing your clothes? But he got enough people to agree to do that, enough leaders to support him of the movement. And within 12 years, by 1931, he had bankrupted the textile mills of Manchester, and the British government was on its knees begging to negotiate with him. So that's how the roundtable conferences happened in India. It was just that one simple act of changing clothes that united the people of India, because it was a simple act that anybody could do. It was a spiritual act because it connected all of us together, and it was a substantial act because the textile industry was the largest industry in England at the time. And it had a huge impact. And I contend that the vegan movement is the Khadi movement of the 21st century. And this is not about India, this is about the whole world. We are also being oppressed in the current system. And to overcome that oppression, all you have to do first is to change what you eat, not what you wear. It's also a simple act that anybody can do. It's a spiritual act because it connects all of us. No matter what our background, it connects us as vegans. And it is a substantial act because the animal agriculture industry is the largest industry in terms of footprint in the world at this time. And Buckminster Fuller said, you never fight things by changing the existing reality. I never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, you build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. So we cannot solve our problems by tweaking the current system. We have to build a new one in which we imagine what we want in our system and implement it. So the caterpillar cannot become a butterfly by just hacking away at its legs and, and saying, okay, I'm going to have now turn this part of my body into a wing. It's a fundamental transformation that has to happen. So it's a new model that you build for the butterfly, where instead of anthropocentric, you have an ecocentric model. So separation from nature, we belong to nature. In the current system, we are pursuing our happiness through external means. We have to pursue happiness from within. This is the story of the cosmic fig tree. Because if you keep wishing for happiness through the tree, you'll never get it. Instead of artificial growth, it should be human creativity that we work on. It's a completely different system. But we have to build models of it, make it completely open source so anybody can take it and replicate it wherever they want, and see where it goes. And that's what we are doing now. So the project we are working on is called the Sacred Lifeline Project. We are partnered with the World Council of Religious Leaders, so all the religious leaders want this to happen. And UDP International is an architectural firm out of Hong Kong that works in sustainable architectures. And the universities are involved because this is a great experiment, a new way of living, a new way of relating to nature. And the first site, we are planning to do it in Crestone, Colorado, because there is 80 acres of land available. And there are already 25 different faith communities in Crestone, Colorado, in a small community. So it will have, what would it look like to live in a way that if all 7.5 billion human beings lived like that, you would use less than half the earth. So the other half can be given back to wildlife. What would it look like if we lived in a way that we have equality from the beginning, from the outset? And sustainability is built in through our currency system. What would it look like? We want to live this out and see. We want to experiment and see. So the idea for the living units is going to be tiny homes surrounding a community kitchen. So we all come together around food, because food is what brings community. And between the homes, the homes are for our individual privacy, of course. Between the homes and the community kitchen in the middle are greenhouses where we grow our food. And the idea is that for every 3 such clusters, there'll be 1 meditation hall. This is really about spiritual living. And it's very common in all religions. Like, there is a book called The Imitation of Christ, where the author lists 4 rules for spiritual living. The 4 rules are: always seek to have less rather than more, always seek to be last rather than first, always seek to do the will of another rather than your own, and always seek to accept what happens as the will of God. And in our current system, we are rewarded when we do the exact opposite of all these 4 rules. So we need to change that, clearly. And so this is another view of the living units. The entrance plaza. That's what it will look like from the inside. These are still concepts, and now we are going around and asking people, would you be interested to try something like this? Would you be interested to sign up to come and live for a week there? Would you buy into a timeshare like this? So that we can fund this from the ground up. Because none of the foundations would want to fund something like this, because they feel threatened. So I just finished my 2nd book last year called Carbon Yoga. Dharma is about what is the right thing to do to address our problems, and yoga is how do you go about doing it. Thank you very much. Open for discussions. Questions? Yes. Yes, ma'am.
Could you talk about the concept of ahimsa and how that relates to veganism?
Yes, ahimsa is the first part or the first step of Patanjali's Yoga Sutra. There are 8 steps in Patanjali's Yoga Sutra. And the first step is the Panchayama, which is the 5 don'ts. Don't hurt any being comes as the first of those 5 steps. And the way it had been interpreted in the past was that ahimsa means you eat a plant-based diet, plus you can have some milk to supplement your diet. So those who followed ahimsa were lacto-vegetarians. And the idea there was that you would take the milk after the calf has finished. You would take the excess milk from the cow, and that's a gift that the cow gives you. Remember, these were all herding cultures that came up with these ideas. Now, I know that in India they were still practicing that when I was a child. And over time, that practice went away. So right now, when I went vegan in 2008, I had this huge sense of guilt lift off my shoulders within a week. And I had no idea why I was carrying all that guilt all along. And then a year later, I was watching a woman milk her cow in the same village. And it hit me why I had that guilt. Because, see, to milk the cow, the first thing she did was to release the calf. And the calf went and started sucking on the udder. And then she started pulling the calf away within 30 seconds. And the calf was fighting her, because he hadn't even started yet. So she calls her husband over. And they both pull the calf away from the mother. And the calf is now bleating. So they tie the calf in front of the mother, And the mother is now licking her baby as he's bleating. And the woman goes and milks every drop out of the cow. About 2 gallons or 3 gallons or so. And then she released the calf so that he can go and suck again at the udder and send a message to the cow, to the mother, that she doesn't have enough milk for her baby. She needs to produce more next time. Then I realized that we were interfering in the natural cycle between a mother and a baby. Normally, when the baby leaves milk in the mother will produce less next time. The baby is sucking when the mother is empty, she will produce more next time. So there is a feedback loop between the mother and the baby. And as human beings, we were actually, at the end of calf's drinking the milk, we would go and pull some more and get extra milk for ourselves. That's what we were doing. And now, we are not doing that anymore. So then I remembered a conversation that I overheard between my grandmother and my grandfather when I was about 6 years old. My grandmother, because when we were kids, my parents used to send all of us to grandpa's place and grandma's place for summer. We would go play with our cousins during summer, and we'd be out in the village. And I overheard my grandmother tell my grandfather that this particular calf was drinking too much. He was not leaving enough for the children. What do I do? And my grandfather told my grandmother, don't let him drink to his fill. Pull him away after 10 minutes. And I knew as a child that there was something wrong going on. But I tried to forget about it, and that was the guilt I was carrying all along. So I really believe that today, ahimsa and veganism are one and the same, even though in the past it wasn't. Thank you. Yes.
How about reducing the consumption of milk? For example, eating meat once in a while. Not like the vegan one day, but once per week.
Once per week, yeah. So, if the situation wasn't too dire, I would say that's okay. The situation is very dire. 70% of animals are gone. We have to come together to address this as one humanity. Okay? In the Khadi movement, Gandhi insisted on purity of the Khadi movement. He refused to let people come and say they are Khadi followers if they were wearing a British bowler hat, for instance. Because he wanted everyone to be pure, to implement Khadi as if they really meant it, because only those people go out and become activists. And they spread the movement. So that's why he was asking people to become pure. So he actually had a statement in 1926 where he said, I consider it my duty to use every honest means at my disposal to make people wear Khadi. And I use the same line now. I say, I consider it my duty to use every honest means at my disposal to make people go vegan. But that's the end goal. The transition is up to you. How you do the transition is up to you. People come at it in different ways, I tend to do things suddenly because I had an incident happen to me when I was a child. I was like around 6 years old, and I asked my mother, I want to go to this friend's house, which was literally far away, and finish my homework there. And she said, that's too far away, don't go there, you'll get lost, etc. And I said, no, I know the way. And so she let me go. And when I was returning, it was late at night, and I missed my way. And I was frightened out of my wits. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know what to do. And I kept walking. And I saw my dad waiting for a bus. And since then, because I was stuck in that mode out of fear. I kept going the same way because even though I knew I was going the wrong way, out of fear. And since then, I never do that. I don't want to experience that ever again. So if I know something is wrong, I just change right away. But everybody is different, You all have your own path home.
Continuing the question, does your biomass, megafauna calculation to fish in the sea also?
That's one.
The land animals.
I think it is. You have to look up the paper.
I'm wondering, is the ocean fish population equally endangered?
Yes, absolutely. It's probably worse. It's worse.
Because we still seem to be fishing a lot.
Right.
Millions of kilograms. So.
Right.
And of course, they are not raised like livestock, so we have no control on how fast they breed.
Right. So what's happening in the ocean is probably worse because there we are deploying big data technology and all kinds of sensors to know exactly where the fish are, and we go and catch them. And when we catch the fish, we not only catch the fish we want, but we catch everything else in the process.
Including juveniles too, probably.
Right, including other species. It's like a huge net, and they take everything there. And this is why current models don't predict what I'm saying, which is that by 2026 all animals are going to die. The models don't predict that right now because the models all assume that we are like a normal predator. And I claim we are not a normal predator. We are a very smart predator, okay, who's got technology to find exactly where the prey is. Normal predators will die when they don't have enough prey. We keep going until there is nothing left. So we have to be very careful because there is an island off the coast of Alaska called St. Matthews Island where the same situation happened. And there, you see, imagine trees as the prey, plants as the prey, because they cannot run, right? Predator in that case would be deer, reindeer. So the US Army had gone and introduced 29 reindeer on that island in 1944. And they wanted some meat for the soldiers during the war. But they didn't need the meat during the war, so they just let the reindeer be. And by 1963, I think it had become 6,000. 1963? Yeah, 6,000.
On one island?
On that island. Because there were no predators for the reindeer on that island, and they were eating all the vegetation, right? And by 1965, it became 42. From 6,000, it went down to 42 in 2 years. Because the 6,000 reindeer ate all the vegetation in the island and starved to death. And that's what we are headed for if we continue doing what we are doing.
So on the mainland, what happens? The mainland Alaska, wolves and some other predators eat them.
Right, yeah.
And hunters go.
Right. Yes.
So I guess two questions. The first would be, what do you think is the biggest barrier of adoption? Is it social norms? Is it religion? Are there other forces at play?
Right.
And the second would be if you had a blank canvas to come up with policies or to try and further this movement in the U.S. or on a global scale, where would you go? What would some of your ideas be?
Okay, so as far as the biggest barriers to adoption, I actually look at who can help the most. And I really believe the religions can help the most. If the religions adopt, just like what the Hindu religion is trying to do, if all religions come together and say the whole world has to go vegan to solve our problem, they can get it done so quickly. Because they have the grassroots network, So right now they're stuck in the current system. See, the current system is like, it has all this scaffolding around it, which is for the caterpillar. It's about growth, growth, growth. And people are stuck, the leaders are stuck on that scaffolding, and they cannot do it. So they need to think beyond that and look at how they can help the whole world. And they're beginning to do that. So we're beginning to address them. So the World Council of Religious Leaders will be a very good start for that. And if I were dictator of the world, I would resign right away. Because this cannot be done in a hierarchical system. The internet, we had the same debate. The internet was a transition from a voice network to a data network. And the voice companies, the telephone companies, came to us and they said, hey, we also have data in our voice. We actually digitize all your voice and we send it out as data. And this is the way we do it. Why don't you adopt that? But that was a trap, because it was a top-down hierarchical system. There was a central server that determined all our calling routes. So they wanted a central server to determine all our data routes as well. So if you wanted to send an email, or you want to click on a link, you have to first send a packet to the central server, and it will tell you exactly how to route your signal from your computer to that website. This way, they would have control over you. They could bill you, all the good stuff that they were thinking of, right? But there was an alternative distributed network that was out there called Ethernet. It was a free-for-all. Anybody could be a central server at that point. There is no routing channel anymore. There's no routing packets anymore. You just send data to the next nearest computer, and it will say, it's not mine, and move it on to the next one. So the path would be taken would be random, but it will get to the destination. And it took off, because it was not controlled by anyone. And people knew that they could just buy another computer and stick it on the Ethernet, and they were part of the internet. So that distributed nature of the internet makes it absolutely robust. And there, when we have conflicts, you know what we decided to do? When we have routing conflicts, toss a coin. Whoever wins the coin toss gets the route. And I think in a distributed social organization, if people are at loggerheads, I would say toss a coin and be done with it. And you can now have a system, a distributed system, because we have cryptography that allows us freedom, so that we can each one of us can say what we really think. And we have blockchain technology that allows us to build very large trust networks. So we can build a distributed social organization right now. So we have all the tools we need to build the utopia we want.
Some of these tiny houses you have on this property, do they have the ability to be able to, say if you didn't want to go to the common to cook, you just wanted to cook something at your own home? Will it be equipped with things like that?
Right. So right now we are looking at the footprint of every home and making sure that if everyone lived like us. And this is why we said the major cooking appliances should be in one spot. So you're sharing it among 18 people or whatever. Maybe you'll have a toaster oven or a microwave or something in each unit. So it'll be a small kitchenette in your unit. So that's what we are thinking. But it's really about all of us figuring out what we can do with our footprint. I'm sure people are going to get very creative. People get very creative when we put constraints on them. Say, here are the ingredients, and do what you can with it. People will come up with amazing dishes. In fact, I'm amazed that the best ice cream I've ever eaten is a raw vegan ice cream. How is it possible? I mean, any ice cream maker could have done that before, and they didn't do it. It's when you start putting restrictions on people, they become more and more creative.
Where did you eat that?
New York City.
Made up of soy?
No. It was raw vegan. So it was basically avocado and banana and maple syrup and cashews. I think they ground it all up together and froze it. That was amazing. Yes, sir.
What do you advocate for our activism? What do you think is, of course it should be a diversity, but what are some of the things you would like to encourage people to immediately take action?
So I would I see the way a caterpillar turns into a butterfly is that the caterpillar cells become imaginal cells inside the body of the caterpillar. And those imaginal cells, at first, the caterpillar's immune system fights them. And then there are so many imaginal cells being born that they overwhelm the immune system, and then they clump together and become different parts of the butterfly. I see every social justice activist as an imaginal cell of the metamorphosis. Okay? And how do we come together? We have to come together around something common. So if you're a social justice activist for, say, racism, make sure that you're a social justice activist who doesn't hurt the animal rights people, the LGBT people, you know? So meaning, make sure that at least you're in alignment with all of them. So that's the unity that we need to get for every imaginal cell. And therefore, I would say veganism is the common link. So I would like to get as much education as possible out into all other social justice activist groups to tell them, please don't ignore the animal rights people, because that's who we are ignoring all the time. That is the separation, that is the foundational separation that's killing us.
Tomorrow is a meeting of Buddhist Peace Fellowship of Buddhist practitioners in the area. What we should do to respond to Trump, how do we become activists? So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, tell them to go vegan, you know?
I know it's true. It's tricky, and I don't know if you've experienced it much else. This is a very progressive city, as you know, and there's a pretty active vegan community, but there's also a huge backlash to paleo diet, and I think you're Dr. Mars, right? Yeah. So at the college he used to work at, now university, I'm told paleo is huge there. It's very, I know students who've been there and they're vegan and they had to leave because it was so unaccepted. And it's very frustrating.
Right.
If you research the nutrition information carefully, it's, to my mind, very clearly pro-vegan, but there's a huge backlash.
Right. The system is fighting it right now. The system, because the system wants to grow, to keep growing. I mean, this is why Trump loves steaks, right? Trump steaks, and they just passed a law saying you can go and kill hibernating bears and wolf cubs. So it's like a totally anti-animal agenda that they have at the moment. So how are you fighting Trump? The number one thing you need to do is to overcome his anti-animal agenda. Otherwise, you're going with him. So.
I think your point is well taken, that there's this resistance, and I've been teaching nutrition for 25 years, and they misinterpreted the paleo movement. The original person that wrote the book, The Paleolithic Prescription, Dr. Boyd Eaton, was at a paleo conference just a few months ago, came out against eating meat. He wrote the book. So it's like, okay, you should listen to the guy that wrote the book.
Right.
Arnold Schwarzenegger has turned into a butterfly. He's got a PSA now about not eating any meat. I showed it on several lectures I did. And say, wow, Arnold Schwarzenegger is a vegan? I don't know if he's quite a vegan yet, but that's a pretty spectacular transformation.
Right.
And it's, and I battle these docs all the time, about, you gotta have somebody. I felt so lousy being a vegan. Well, maybe you weren't the right kind of vegan. So I think the question is not whether you should be a vegan or not. That's, I think, is a done deal. The question is, what kind of vegan should you be? We could all argue about those kinds of things. But I do believe that there is an ideal diet. And I've traveled to a couple of blue zones, where people live the longest in the world, and they don't really eat meat. So maybe once every 7 days to 2 weeks, and it's a tiny amount. It's not really part of their diet. And 70% of their calories are carbohydrates. It's like, well, for me, I'm going to copy what the oldest and longest lived people in the world are doing, and they don't have dementia, and they don't have diabetes. Now, ironically, in one of the zones, they're giving them pharmaceuticals because the government of Costa Rica has said, well, we're going to support your whatever medical needs you have. The medical needs are part of the, that other picture, which is pharmaceuticals. And so, as Dr. Rao has presented, the best way to fight Donald Trump is to just, from a grassroots effort, he would turn into nothing. He would disappear. I mean, he's obviously nothing. 28 million pounds of antibiotics are used in livestock every year. So in the United States alone. So out of the 35 million that's used. So no livestock, no antibiotics, and all of a sudden the food, which is genetically modified, now comes from Bayer, because Bayer bought Monsanto for $66 billion. Suddenly they're like the British, and they're suddenly going to be groveling back, like, oh, please, can you bail us out? It's like, I mean, it's such a simple thing, and we could have tons of fun, and it needs to be expanded, like the picture of the vegans. I mean, some of the most spectacular athletes in the world, Rich Rawls, 5 Ironmen in 7 days. I mean, the guy's an amazing athlete. He's in that movie, What the Hell? So they interviewed him on several occasions. Dave Scott, who won more Ironmans in Hawaii than anyone else, is vegetarian. So, I mean, you look at a gorilla. I don't know how much gorillas weigh, but they're big and they're muscular. They don't eat anything, animals. And it's like, to say that we need more protein, this is like, we gotta change that around. So I'm not know if I'm gonna do it yet, pledge to go back to school and start teaching again, because I just can't tolerate this, this lack of knowledge. This is obvious, it's like checkmate right here. But I really want to thank you. We have books available back here. So Karma Yoga and Dharma Yoga for $10 and $15. It's to support his cause, really. I purchased 50 copies of Dr. Rao's books, and I've been handing them out. But I should probably be collecting money for them, just so to give to the movement and stuff. And we also have a Cowspiracy available for $15. And if you buy both books, they're $20 for both. So I really want to thank you guys. And I'm going to create a restaurant in Portland. So I have a couple of supporters. And my goal is to make a vegan restaurant that doesn't close at 9 o'clock. It's open until 2:30. But it's not like the By and By in Alberta. And it's comfortable, and you can bring your parents there, you can bring your kids, and it's super fun. They got nice music, and you got the little candle and the little doilies on the table. And that's what needs to be done. We need to cater to these other populations.
And make it fun.
Make it right. They have a restaurant here that's
and then you start like bone broth, bullshit.
The yoga center.
I know. I told Dr. Rao, I said, you got to explain what yoga is, yoga union, because he ain't exactly following the principles. So it's okay. It'll transform. Right now, Annie and Todd, they're, in caterpillar stage. They're going to transform quickly. I think we've got them on the ropes. Say that again?
If the market demands it, the vendor will provide it.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like, Portland, the reason I live in Portland is because I feel that this is the hub of the imaginal cells, this is it right here.
Good.
You could live without oil. I mean, it wouldn't be comfortable, be a little chilly in the winter, but you're not going to die. Places like New York and Boston and Detroit, Chicago, you can't really live there if you're not burning something to heat yourself. And then in the warm states, you need air conditioning, otherwise you're going to die. Phoenix it's amazing that Dr. Rao is in Phoenix. It's like, to me, it's like the birthplace of everything that's wrong, except for maybe Vegas. Vegas is right there behind. It's like,
That's why the strongest warriors go there.
It's right. If you saw the movie Bugsy, it was a story of Las Vegas, and it was what's his name, the actor, Warren Beatty. I think he used to look like him. And he goes out to the middle of the desert, and like, right here, we're going to have, a spectacular, casino, and we're going to put water in here. And it's like, if you go to the Bellagio in Vegas, they get this giant pool of water, and it's just like evaporating up into the atmosphere. I mean, it's the height of blasphemy. I mean, how do you do that? I mean, it's, you got to stop that. It's like, dumb. You know, golf courses in Phoenix. It's like, it's a desert. You can't grow grape. You're sucking all of the water out of the Ogallala aquifer down to like 10, 15% now. When that goes, you know, that whole dust storm that we had back in the 30s, that's like nothing. This is going to be like real serious. So, anyway.